I don't have a tank skin cap. Normally Harry says my hair come on killing. Tom Kirshner with the London Bridge Rotary Club contacted our club, President Charlie, a few weeks ago. He's from Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And they asked us if we would help in locating and recognizing one of 30 of the surviving members of the USS Arizona, which is sunk at Pearl Harbor. Next Friday will mark the 60th anniversary of that event, which President Franklin Roosevelt celebrated in. Just a few weeks ago, First Lady Laura Bush was making a speech to a convention in New York City, and she made a comment that every generation has some major event that seems to bond you together, something that sort of defines their generation. She said for our children, it will always be September 11, 2001, when the World Trade Center was attacked. And she said for her generation, and for many of us here, it will always be November 22nd, 1963, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And she said for her parents' generation, it would always be, and there'd never be anything that would surpass December the 7th, 1941, when the Japanese surprise attack Pearl Harbor. And that's what the program's going to be about. I have a special guest with me who is one of those survivors of USS Arizona, and I'll recognize him a little later in the program. The attack on Pearl Harbor was originally intended to be 3 strikes, which consisted of about 5 elements of the Japanese Imperial Navy. There were submarines with torpedoes, there were high-altitude bombers, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and some fighter planes. The third phase of that attack actually began on Saturday night, just prior to that Sunday morning, and it was when 5 of the Japanese submarines released 5 mini-subs that had 2 torpedoes apiece and 2 crew members on board, and their mission was to wait at the entrance to the harbor till the next morning, just before daylight, and then they were to slip into the harbor and then go to the bottom of the harbor and wait till the second airstrike was over. And they were to circle around Fort Island, and they were to try to wreak as much havoc as they could on the remaining battleships that might still be afloat. The actual assault started the next morning at 0600 when about 353 of the first wave of 353 of the Japanese planes took off from the flight decks of the aircraft carriers. And then at 0640, one of the submarines was spotted coming into the harbor, and it was sunk by one of our Navy patrol boats. Then at 0755, the first wave of airstrike began. The high-altitude bombers targeted the airports, the torpedo bombers, and the fighter aircraft set out to destroy the battleships. And then the dive bombers, they had the targets not only the runways and the planes, but also the battleships as well. And that strike lasted roughly about 15 minutes, and then that first flight headed back towards the carriers, and the second wave of the aircraft took off. And at 0854, about 59 minutes later, the second strike began, and by 9:30 that morning it was all over. Now, it's interesting, the submarines never actually engaged. I told you one of them was detected and sunk right at the very beginning. One of them ran aground, and the 2 crew members were captured and became the first 2 prisoners of war, after prisoner of war number 1 and number 2. And then later on, one of the other submarines was found at the entrance to the harbor in deeper water. It sunk, and then the other 2 never was accounted for. And then at 1300 that day, the Japanese fleet was in full steam back towards Japan. But in their wake, they left a broad swath of damage, death, and destruction. There was 2,403 men killed that day. 1,178 were seriously wounded. They had sunk or beached 12 ships and damaged 9 others. They destroyed 164 aircraft and did severe damage to 159 others. Out of the 2,403 people that died that day, 1,177 were one ship, USS Arizona. Normally the Arizona, or at least it was its normal officer and complement crew at that time, was 1,512 men, but that morning of the attack, only 1,288 were on board, and only 105 of them survived. Before I introduce our guest, and to give you more of a better feel of what these people were experiencing at that time, I've got 3 eyewitness accounts of that day from people that were there that I'd like to read and share with you before I introduce Mr. Harris. The first one is from a machinist mate second class, Bill Woodward. He was aboard the U.S. Arizona. He's going to speak to you from a distance of 60 years and from a watery grave. He's one of the 1,102 men that are still entombed inside the ship. It's a letter that he wrote on December the 2nd to his wife and daughter. He said, "My very own precious darling wife and baby. Oh, darling, I do much hope that we go back to the States before long. There's a lot of talk that we will, and a lot that we won't. Myself, I'm afraid to say, I have built myself and you up so many times for an awful letdown that it's just about to drive me out of my mind. So I'm just praying and hoping and letting the rest of the men do the talking. It shouldn't be so very long before we know one way or the other. Oh God, how I hope it's the right way. Well, darling, our little one was 4 months old the 30th, wasn't she? Darling, I do hope that you at least have some idea of how badly I want to see you both. I know you aren't having a very good time yourself, sitting around the house by yourself, taking care of the little one. It was so rough last night when I came up off an 8 to 12 watch that I could hardly stay in my bunk. How's our little one, my sweet? Fine, I hope. Oh, darling, I can hardly wait to see her as I have dreamed and thought about her so terribly much. I would like to see her at least once before she gets old enough to walk. After 6 more months, my sweet, you will never have to be alone for a whole day again. I will be terribly glad when we get back in because it will be that much closer to the 13th, and I want to get my mail that I should have waiting for me there from you. I only received 1 letter this week, so I should make up for it next week. I have an 8 to 12 watch this time out, and it's really a killer. It seems as though you're on watch all the time. But it has its good points too, such as making the time pass faster. Well, darling, I'm close for the day and going to watch. Your own Bill. Imagine receiving that letter 2 to 3 weeks after the whole world knew about the conflict that part of it. The second letter is from a survivor also of that ship that morning. He's seaman second class, George Dewey Frainer. And he says, as usual, there was a warm breeze that Sunday morning. We had finished breakfast and drifted out of the compartment to get a little air. This was our normal routine on weekends, as we had no workstation to do. It was fortunate for us that we were able to sleep until 6:30, as many of us had been out the night before. Just as we left the mess area, we heard this noise. We went outside to take a look because it's usually very quiet. When we arrived, we could hear and see there were airplanes. I looked across the bow of the ship and could see large plumes of smoke coming up from Fort Island. At first, it didn't mean anything to us until a large group of planes came near the ship, and we could see for the first time the rising sun on one of the plane's wings. The bombing was becoming heavier all around us, and we knew this was really it. At first, there was a rush of fear. The blood started to flow real fast. It was then that General Porter sounded over the speaker, and everything became automatic. My battle station was on a forward 5-inch gun, and it was standard practice to keep only a limited amount of ammunition at the guns. There was only one ready gun crew on each side of the ship, and mine wasn't one of them. There we were, the Japanese dropping bombs over us, and we had no ammo. All the training and practicing for a year, and when the real thing came, we had no ammunition where we needed it. As unfortunate as this was, that simple fact was to save my life. Somehow, the gun captain pointed at me and said, you go aft and start bringing that ammunition out of the magazines. The aft magazines were 5 decks below. A few moments later, I found myself deep below the waterline in a part of the ship I normally would never be in. I remember getting these cases of ammo powder and shells weighing about 95 each. I had begun lifting shells into the hoist when a deafening roar filled the room and the entire ship shuddered. It was the forward magazine, 1.5 million pounds of gunpowder exploding in a massive fireball, disintegrating the whole forward part of the ship. Only moments before, I had stood with my gun crew just a few feet from the center of the explosion. Admiral Kidd, Captain Van Velkenberg, and my whole gun crew had been killed, everyone on top. Seconds after the explosion, the lights went out and it was pitch black. Almost immediately, a thick acrid smoke filled the magazine locker, and the metal walls began to get hot. In the dark, and not being able to breathe, we made our way to the door hatch, only to find it shut and locked. Somehow, we were able to open the hatch and to start to make our way up the ladder. I was nauseated by the smell of burning flesh, which turned out to be my own as I climbed on the ladder. A quick glance around revealed nothing in the darkness but the moaning and sounds of falling bodies told me that some of my shipmates had succumbed to defeat and had died in their attempt to survive. Getting through that choking kind of smoke was a real ordeal, the kind of smoke that really hurts your lungs. After a while, I began to get weak and lightheaded. I could feel myself losing the battle to save my own life. I hung to the ladder feeling good and felt that it was all right for me to let go. At that moment, I looked up and could see a small point of light through the smoke. It gave me the strength to go on. After what seemed to me like an eternity, I reached the deck gasping and choking. I lay down for a few moments. The warm Hawaiian air filled my lungs and cleared my head. I glanced over to the forward end of the ship to see nothing but a giant wall of flame and smoke. Behind me, a Marine lay dead on the deck, his body split in two. I began to realize there were dead men all around me. Some men were burning and wandering aimlessly. The sound of someone shouting, "Put out the fire!" cut through the sound of the battle, but it was obvious the ship was doomed. I made my way to the side of the ship, which by this time was sinking fast, and jumped off the fantail. The shoreline of Fort Island was only a short distance. There was burning oil all around the ship, but the aft was clear. After swimming to shore, I was taken to the Naval Air Station. Every table in the mess hall had a man on it. After the attack was over, many of the battleship sailors, myself included, were taken to the USS Tennessee. I was there for 1 week and then transferred to the U.S.S. Lexington, and an appointment with a place called Coral Sea. The third account is from an officer. He was Lieutenant Haruo Yoshino. He was a torpedo bomber with the Japanese Imperial Navy. And this is what he had to say. He says the Navy program was considered the elite of military forces, and to be a pilot was the highest honor, the greatest role of the samurai to us. Of his training, Yoshino said, physically and mentally it was brutal. We were trained from young boys to believe in duty and honor above all else, and this was our philosophy. We were trained in the martial arts, heavy exercise, and discipline. We lived and died for the Emperor and our nation. To die in battle was the greatest honor, and this is something that many Western people never understood about us. Prior to the Pearl Harbor operation, he said, we had continuous briefings, going over aerial photographs, receiving weather reports, and double-checking our equipment. I remember the night before the attack, all of us visited the Shino Shrine on board, even the captain and our flight commander. We prayed for victory and drank the ceremonial sake, even though almost all of us did not feel very good about what we were going to do. I could not sleep. I was too nervous, and I was not alone. Many of the men were nervous, but an excited kind of nervous. I noticed no fear, none at all. We did speak about the possibility of a surprise attack and the fact that it was not honorable. I know that many in your country will find this difficult to understand. This was my first combat, and many things go through your head during this time. It was the code we lived by, the Bushido of the samurai. It was not our way to go and assassinate or sneak up on your enemy. The Western people call it chivalry, but to us, it was simply a matter of time-honored tradition. We believe that if you were to attack an enemy, you should warn him. This was honorable. All of us, especially we officers, believe this in order to set the example by our own sense of duty. In fact, we were informed that the United States was to have already been informed of our declaration of war at least 1 hour before we attacked, although naturally they would not be informed of where we would be and how we would do this. It was only later that we learned that this had not happened, and the pride of victory was lessened in some way by a sense of shame for some of us. We flew around Keno Point, which was marked on our maps and we all had maps showing their routes and photographs of the battleships in the harbor. However, we were under the impression that some of the carriers would be there also. These were the top priority targets. Individual pilots in my group did not have particular targets to hit, but we were to follow on the lead aircraft, and as soon as we came within range, we were to choose a target within easy reach for our torpedoes. The flight was broken up into 2 groups of 12 aircraft each, which would give us a good chance of hitting anything at anchor as we were flying abreast. This proved quite effective. When we flew over, it was not until we passed over the high ground and banked left into the channel that we saw there were no aircraft carriers. The battleships were marked as secondary targets if they were still there, which they were. I flew over the channel and looked at my other pilots beside me, although I was out front more than the others. At first, I was amazed that there was no any aircraft fire at that time. I remember thinking that if they had been aware of the state of war existing between our nations, why were they not prepared for the attack? As I saw a large ship in front, I dropped the nose and fell from 500 meters to about 10 meters over the water. I lined up the sight, and when the silhouette spanned the sight, I released the torpedo. The weight of the heavy torpedo leaving the aircraft made it jump up, but I put the nose back down to see if it was running true. I knew it would strike the ship, so I pulled up and cleared the super torpedo. I banked to the right and climbed, circling to see how the other planes were doing. By the time I came back around to form up the return flight to Kaga, the Americans had begun firing everything they had into us. I saw 3 planes, all torpedo bombers, smoking, and one just flew up and crashed into the water. I had some tracer ammunition go past me, but I was not hit. I noticed that all of the members of my flight had been successful and had grouped together. But I noticed that of the 12 aircraft in the second flight, 5 were missing before we even cleared the harbor. Yoshina said, "I never felt any hatred for Americans or anyone. I can say that after the war, when I met many Americans, many from Pearl Harbor, my respect grew immensely. I like Americans, and I feel sad that we had to go through such a thing as the war." And he also added, "I would say that one must respect all people, never underestimate an enemy, and never forget that any enemy may become your friend." Now then, before I recognize our special guest, who's also a survivor of that day on USS Arizona, I'd like to do one other thing. I'd like for all my veterans that's in here today, I'd like you to all stand. Any that served, firmly served. Keep standing up for Now, I'm going to see if any of y'all can remember your time in the service. Facing movements are given 2 commands. Attention is attend, hut, and on the word hut you come to attention. And then to salute, it's hand salute, 2, and on the word 2 you snout salute, 2. Son of Harris. Ms. Harris, on behalf of the London Ridge Rotary Club, I'd like to present you with this commemorative set of coins. The Rotary clubs in that district, every year for the last 31 years, been minting and selling these coins to raise money for local activities, Rotary Foundation, and to support the U.S.S. Arizona Memorial at Pearl Harbor. And they sent these coins to us and asked us to present them to Ms. Harris. And also, Ms. Harris, could I get you to come up here?
Oh, yes.
President Charlie and I visited with the Harrises about 2 weeks ago, I guess, and we were there for probably an hour and a half, imposing on them, just talking. But while we were there, there's 3 things that really stood out to me while I was there at their home. One was all the pictures that they had of themselves and their children and their grandchildren. The second was all the number of clocks in that one room. Clocks amazing to me. I like clocks. I counted at least 6 in that one room. I know there was more, but I counted 6. And then there was a tremendous amount of memorabilia there from World War II and Pearl Harbor and Mr. Harris's career. He had a shadow box on the wall with his ribbons and his medals and all on it, and some other items there that's displayed. So on behalf of the Lawrenceburg Rotary Club, I'd like to give you this commemorative edition of Battleship Arizona. That's all that's in this book. It's about its history from when it was commissioned in 1915, when it was decommissioned officially in December the 29th, 1941. It's full of pictures and it's got your name in it. So I hope you enjoy it. Showing the next year. This time I'd like to impose on Mr. Harrison, ask him to just tell us a little bit about his experience that day on December 7th. Mr. Harrison, would you please tell me?
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Appreciate you and Charles coming out and inviting me to the dinner. I could probably think of some more stories if you want to invite me again. I know that I can sum up what I did that day in fewer words of what some of these letters were. And if my voice starts quivering a little, I just think about it, but I make my voice nervous. But anyway, December 7th, 1941, we were eating breakfast. We always chow down at 7:30 in the morning. And but anyway, there were several of us that gotten through and gone up on the boat deck, which was my quarters up there. And we had just horsing around waiting till the flag rolled. And one boy pulled out some 10-pin gum, I remember. We were wrestling over it. All of a sudden we heard a blast there on Fort Island. And we looked up, here this plane come by with the rising sun on it. So we knew that we was in trouble. So they sounded general quarters. We got to our gun. I was corner on a 5-inch aircraft gun, and 13 was a crew. The 6 of us got there. And we did have some ammunition. We had an ammunition box that held 25 projectors, and it was full because of why I don't know. But anyway, maybe we was expecting. But anyway, I got on the seat. I operated the gun in elevation and did the firing on it. And a plane had come by, and of course you try to operate a 5-inch gun now, but 2 operates it, why, not much you could do. I could have done a lot more with a shotgun there. Anyway, the second bomb that I've seen fall, well, it hit one of the ships above us. And then 3 or 4, and a plane had come by, and right when my first loader got there, get them around with that, so he ran that projector in there. I tried to guess about when I seen the plane coming, you know, if I could guess at the time that he got there, but I never did shoot one down. And I hollered at my below that operated the gun in train, because there I hollered at him and said, "Come around on me," you know, and so I looked over the gun, he's gone. So here I was right there, me and 2 more guys by ourselves. But anyway, by that time, the bombed the forecastle of the ship was, and where our big guns was, 14-inch, and evidently it hit a magazine or something, but and fire started coming back on us, and we had to leave the gun. So we ran out toward the after the ship, and I stumbled over something and fell. But and when I got to my feet, well, I I saw they dropped the bomb right in front of it. And these boys, I could still see them in the air, you know, and I remember myself being in there also, but when I hit the deck, well, it knocked me unconscious. And when I woke up, I had my arms over my head, and I put my hand out to get up. And when I felt the deck, we had the wooden deck, you know, up there. And when I felt that deck all tore up, then I realized really what was happening. So I thought, I got to get out of here. And so I ran aft a little ways and went to the side of the boat deck and went over the lifeline, and we had a quarter deck or a galley deck where the galley was, one deck below the boat deck. It was very narrow, but anyway, just as I dropped to that deck, well, boy, then the flames hit me. And hit me from the left side. And that's when I got most of my burns right there. So I thought, well, when it's come, you know, my time is due. But anyway, luck was with me that I started over the lifeline of the galley deck, and it was right outside the door of our galley. And on the side of the ship, a big garbage hopper out there. And so accidentally, or lucky me, the lid was closed on that garbage. And so when I got over, I crawled over, went over that, and I didn't jump. I just tumbled over into the water about 25 feet below. And when I hit the water, it knocked me unconscious again. But when I came to, I had my hand up on the blister top, and I thought, golly, what's happening right then? I really thought about this a lot of times. It's been so easy for me to just turn loose and go down, you know, because I was burned so such pain and had shoes on. Uniforms today was shorts, you know, skivvy shirt, and shoes, socks and shoes. And I had these shoes on. If you ever tried to swim with shoes on, I mean, high top shoes too, so it was something else. But I thought, well, I got too much to do for. So I started swimming toward Fort Valley. And there was a motor launch sitting there just before I got to Fort Valley. There was about 4 or 5 guys in it. They were just sitting there. And so I got up to the side of it, greased up, skin was hanging off my hand that far, you know. But anyway, I got pulling, they didn't even get me in there. And I pulled myself up and got on there. And when I got there, well, here they were just sitting there still, didn't know what to do. Of course, I knew that something had to be done. So I didn't know how to run the motor rock, because I was a gunner. And so I hollered, does anybody here know how to run this thing? One boy said, yeah, I do. I said, get the hell back here and just get out of here. Path between where we went into it and up to a bomb shelter. So here we wasn't the only ones going up that path either. There was a lot of them. And you talked about something that you wanted to help, but you couldn't. Hear these guys falling, reaching up for you, you know, wanting to lift them up. But I knew if I ever went down and tried to help one, I'd never get back up again. So anyway, we went on to the bomb shelter. when they, finally got an all clear signal, and they came and got me in an ambulance and carried me to the dispensary there on Fort Island. And Fort Island, the dispensary was built in 4 square buildings, and they had a wall coming from each door inside. And right where that